Now, one MLA whose own conduct has been questioned several times, both in and out of the Assembly, is Ian Paisley Jr. And he had plenty to say about the code and strong words for one MLA in particular.
I must say, speaking personally, as a case study over the last 2 years of the committee, where I think 5 or 7 specific complaints were launched against me by members of this House, most of them repetitive, all of them collapsing, and indeed, but I think the most important thing is all of them costing this Assembly credibility, and all of them costing the House considerable money. Now, the member wants me to give way. The member launched several complaints against me. The last complaint he launched, according to a letter from the Ombudsman, which I have in my possession, cost the taxpayer almost £10,000 to investigate. £10,000 to investigate everything that was already in the public record and already there. Serving what? Serving only to call this House into disrepute for the sake of calling the House into disrepute. Indeed, to quote Mr Frawley, when he himself gave evidence to the committee, and it's recorded on page 107 of your report, of the report before the House, that it would be wrong for the committee, and the committee does not want to become a referee in a game or a football match, which is about people scoring points inevitably when complaints are being made. The opportunity arises to score points, so it is important that members be constrained from discussing a complaint in public during an investigation, and constraints are not only appropriate but necessary. It's a damn pity those constraints didn't apply for the last 2 years, because we've had people's reputations dragged through the mud for one reason, and one reason only: to score the cheapest, lowest, dirtiest, meanest, nastiest complaints possible against individuals in this House and their character. For what? For a couple of cheap votes? A couple of cheap votes that they'll never, ever get. And I think this House has been done a great service by the report that they have done to this House today, and I think that that will go a long way, because I, like most members in this House, if I can echo the words of the new Speaker of the House of Commons, I believe most members of this House come to this House to do one thing: to serve the people. And by golly, we may disagree with each other, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we're here, I believe, by virtue of the fact that we want to serve our people. And to have your character questioned because of that, that's the lowest, nastiest, cheapest activity. And members of this House, quite frankly, Mr Speaker, should be above it. I hope this code helps them not to suffocate in their own self-righteousness, but to get above it. Thank you.
Ian Paisley Jr. of the DUP, who has obviously taken some of those attacks quite personally. Now, Carmel Hanna is the chair of the relevant committee. She's with me now. Thanks for joining us. Mark was saying earlier that this report suggests that your committee is going to get more teeth. How sharp are your teeth going to be?
Well, I think you're maybe talking about the sanctions. That certainly, we can have the sanction that a member will be without pay. And that probably is the most serious sanction. And obviously,
given the fact that it's a self-regulating club,
yes.
Do you think you will be willing, to bite?
I think we have to be. I think that has to be there if necessary. That may not be used, and I hope it isn't used. But I think we have to be taken seriously. We have to have teeth. There's no point in having this code of conduct if it isn't there to regulate behaviour, if it isn't there to ensure that we're accountable, that there's transparency, and that taxpayers do get good value for their money.
And yet you're maybe not going as far as some other institutions would go. And again, another issue that Mark just raised a few minutes ago was the fact that at Westminster, the Green Book says don't rent property from family members. Here you're just saying register that as an interest.
Yes, we haven't, but it's a work in progress, and it will be reviewed, and I've no doubt it will be added to, and we have been watching carefully what's happening in Westminster. It certainly has changed in that there's far more clarity and guidance. We've recommended this in how office cost allowance can be spent. So there won't be the opportunity to pay excessive rents, or indeed to pay family members any more than you pay any other staff, because we do recommend job titles and indeed salary bands related to them for all staff.
In terms of any Assembly member who breaks the financial rules, I imagine the public will be quite happy if you threw the book at him or her. But you also have aspects in this code of conduct that deal with the expression of opinions, potentially sort of homophobic opinions or something like that. Now, that could get more subjective if you actually take a sanction against a member, because one person's homophobic opinion might be another person's expression of their deeply held belief.
That's always going to be a difficult one. There's no doubt about that. Every member's entitled to their view. They're entitled to express it in any democratic society. But they're not entitled, it's the manner in which they express it. They're not entitled to offend other people. And we do have it underpinned, by the Nolan principles, and indeed by the principle of respect as well. So it is a fine balance, and it's always going to be a difficult one. And I think that was demonstrated even in the Chamber today.
We heard from Ian Paisley Jr. there. He took the complaints against him very personally. Yeah. He was directing a lot of the comments, really, I think, against Declan O'Lone, who's about to replace you as chair of the committee that will be enforcing all of this.
Yes.
Could be potentially difficult.
It could be, although I have to say, some of the complaints against Ian Paisley Jr. were upheld. And indeed, it was on the back of some of those complaints that we actually recommended much tighter regulation of office cost allowance.
And yet, ultimately, though, he was judged not to have broken the rules sufficiently for anything to be done about it.
Because there were no rules. Because actually, it didn't break any rules because there were no rules to break. Because there was no guidance on how the money should be spent.
OK. Going back to that point about free speech or restricting people's comments, is this not something that could just simply be left up to the Speaker? Because we've seen him rule on parliamentary or unparliamentary language, and even there some people think he's gone too far to limit what people can say in this chamber. Let's face it, sometimes it's dull enough.
We don't deal with complaints in the chamber. That is the Speaker's role. We only deal with complaints outside the chamber. And that's where it may come into play if somebody makes extremely aggressive and abusive or indeed insulting remarks.
Any past incident that comes to mind?
Well, I'm sure some people are aware we certainly had complaints, particularly about homophobic remarks.
OK. We'll leave it there. Carmel, Hanna, many thanks indeed.